I want to introduce Paul Bevy, who's our Director of Tech Transfer here at the Boyce Thompson Institute. So he does a lot of fun stuff. And Paul, let's start off by asking you, what is tech transfer? If anyone's never heard of that.
Yeah, sure. It's a pretty complicated thing, and I think I've told you this before. Probably the hardest part of my job is explaining to my children what it is I actually do for a living. But let me try to explain what it is that we do. So, you know, like the title says, it's our job to try to transfer technology from the science that's generated here at BTI out into society, is sort of the general term that we use for it.
So you do, it's in your title, so we know you do a lot with technology. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here and talk about the sensitivities. You know, we're live streaming today. This hopefully is being watched by a broad audience, and you were just on a panel where we screened a screening of the new documentary Food Evolution. So there's a lot of nervousness out there about biotechnology, and that's kind of something, you know, you work with from time to time. So what is kind of your take on that particular part of our science, and why do you think it sometimes gets misconstrued?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say that it gets misconstrued, but I mean, to sort of answer your question, where I take it is, you know, I think people are nervous. And they are concerned about their safety and their health, and they should be. And, you know, so if you look at the kind of products that we're talking about, some of the things that were talked about in that movie, these are things that should and are tested very rigorously. And so people should continue to ask those kind of tough questions, and scientists have to continue to answer them. And that's our job here. That's why we do things like this. Yeah. I mean, people should reach out to scientists to basically figure out, you know, what these new products are. And again, this technology is complicated. It's hard to understand. As technology evolves, it gets more and more complicated, and it sort of gives you more and more questions. You kind of wonder, really, what the heck's going on with some of these complicated products, like just the HPV vaccine that I just described. It's a pretty technical product, you know, that's really hard for sort of general public to sort of understand. So they've got to reach out to scientists, you know, to help get those answers.
Yeah, that's how you answered a question when you were on the panel recently, and I thought that was a really good answer. You know, this was a local audience here in Ithaca, and you said, "Hey, we're right up the road. If you have questions, you know, ask a scientist." But you know, anyone who's watching, for the most part, probably has some sort of a science operation going on nearby, where someone they can write or email. So I mean, I think you're right. A dialogue between the public and scientists would be a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's good. You know, I mean, I think we're starting to sort of peel back sort of this facade that's sort of surrounded science for the last 150 years or so, right? I mean, we were just kind of like this, you know, this creepy lab up on the hill where stuff was kind of going on, and people didn't really kind of want to know what was going on. But now people want to understand science, and the only way to do that is to communicate with the scientists. And, you know, so it's starting to make our job a lot more interesting. It's harder. We have to explain ourselves a lot more than we used to, you know, but I think it's the only way to keep building and keep people's trust in science and scientific endeavors.
So speaking of endeavors, what's the latest thing going on in the tech transfer world here at BTI? What consumes your time right now?
Yeah, well, let me give you a couple of other sort of local examples. Obviously, Michelle gave a great one when she talked about citrus greening in the last segment. But I think one of the important projects that we're working on now, I can give one example that comes out of Greg Martin's lab here at BTI. He works on tomato. He works on a disease in tomato that maybe you're going to talk about later, but it's called speck. It's caused by a bacteria. I think most local tomato growers probably at some point in their history of growing tomatoes have maybe experienced some of this, and it can be a pretty devastating disease in tomatoes. And over the years, actually, work that was done originally by Greg and someone that he worked as a postdoc for actually discovered what we call R genes. So these are resistance genes. So what is it in a tomato plant that makes it resistant to a particular disease that we have to deal with? Most tomato plants that are commercial on the market have a resistance gene in them for bacterial spec, but these plants are evolving and you're starting to see new versions of these diseases show up. So we end up with plants that historically don't have that same resistance. So one of the things they're doing here at BTI now is actually looking back at wild relatives of tomatoes to look for new resistance genes that could potentially be put into the crop varieties of tomato, either bred in or transgenically done. It can be done either way, to make them resistant to sort of these new pathogens that are sort of popping up. Because viruses are always evolving, plants are evolving. You know, it's like sort of they call it an arms race between the plants and the pathogens. So it's sort of an ongoing battle, if you want to look at it that way. But I think it's really cool because, you know, basically we're helping to preserve the diversity of wild, you know, tomato species, because that is really a storehouse of sort of knowledge, if you want to call it, for where we can find solutions to tomorrow's problems. You know, in your question earlier about GMOs, I think people are pretty comfortable with sort of tomato genes being bred into tomatoes since we've been doing it for such a long time.
Right.
You know, it's one of these sort of less controversial, less scary types of technologies. So that's kind of the current example.
Yeah.
And other labs, the Giovanoni lab here that works on flavor, you know, and fruit quality in tomato are doing the same thing. They're looking at wild species because those are the plants that have been around for a long time. So they've been through it all.
Right.
You know, so a lot of times all you have to do is look in the wild for, you know, the kind of characteristics that you want. Obviously, they don't have the fruit characteristics that are in the plants that we get in the store, but when you put the two together, you know, you can solve those particular problems and still make products that are that consumers like.
Well, I'm going to give you the wrap-up question that I'm giving everyone so far, and then I'm probably going to give everybody that appears today. You know, if somebody out there is not working as a scientist or in the science business, how do we help? How do we help advance science at a place like BTI?
Well, that's a pretty tough question, but it's a good one, right? And let's see the answer as best that I can. You know, I think BTI is a basic science discovery institute. That's the core of our mission, is to understand, you know, certainly plant biology is one of our core missions, is to understand plants. I mean, that actually can be expounded to, you know, other living systems, but that's kind of where our history and our focus comes from. So when we talk about an event like this and supporting BTI, what you're doing is you're supporting basic science discovery work. My job as a tech transfer person is to hopefully eventually see those basic discoveries, make it that circuitous route around to a place where they're going to have the maximum benefit to society. But really, like I said, at the core is really understanding plants, understanding science, and that's what you're supporting with a project like this.
Well, thank you, Paul Debbie, Director of Tech Transfer here at BTI. Now you know a little bit more about what Tech Transfer does, and I imagine you have counterparts, right, at other institutes. There's other people like you. You're not the only one, right?
Oh, yeah. We have a whole association of, you know, what we call university technology managers. We're kind of a private institute, but we kind of fall into that group. But yeah, we also have licensing people here at Cornell. You'll find them at Ithaca College. They're at any of these places because, you know, I think that's one of the things. I mean, we're spending the people's money to do this kind of work, and they want to see results. And it's my job to hopefully make that happen.
So if you're not seeing results, we'll give you Paul's email address and his phone number. You can hunt him down. That's right. Well, thank you, Paul, so much for joining us and shedding a little bit of light on what you do here. And you know, I personally always love talking to Paul because I think he really does a great job of providing a really nice summary of what research at BTI is all about and the impact that it has on all of us and our lives and our diets and our health. And so it's always great to talk with him. We've podcasted with Paul, we've done other videos with Paul, and we're planning some more videos with Paul. So we're going to make Paul's work and the work he does here at BTI hopefully household.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity to tell you guys more.
All right, Paul Debbie will be right back in about 10 minutes with members of our Fay Lab who do bioinformatics on some of your favorite crops. And we'll talk about all of the new discoveries that they've made and some of the headlines they've made as well because of those discoveries. So we're going to step out of frame and we'll be right back in a few minutes.